Barakatah Yahweh, Barakatah Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakah, Hakwadash Barakatah. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone that rule well. And peace and salutations to Yakim out there pushing this word in truth. This is the Brother Rai with another video, and I'm going to be discussing today on how the relationships and tensions in the world are getting more taut and perilous, which I pray happens sooner and sooner, because I'm ready to get out of this captivity. And the article I'm going to be using is on consortiumnews.com, and the title is Miscalculations in Israel Could Pave the Way to Wider War. Following a number of foreign policy miscalculations, Israel and its allies in the Trump administration could be setting us up for more trouble in the Middle East, warns Alistair Crook in this analysis. Last week, Israeli political leaders were rolling with guffaws and ribbing each other in delight as Vice President Mike Pence proved that, as a Christian Zionist, he was more Zionist than the Zionists in the Knesset, minus, of course, its evicted Arab members. But one might wonder what the sober Israeli security echelon figures were thinking as they listened to Pence's Knesset speech, which was rife with biblical references and declarations of his admiration for the people of the book. I'm going to go to my first scripture in Revelations 2 and 9, a favorite. Salakia. I know thy works and tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich. And I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. And as we know, Esau, Edom, the so-called white man, comes in the spirit of Satan, and those Amalekite gutter rats over there call themselves the Jews, but with each passing day, not just ourselves, but everybody else is seeing that clearly they're not. Perhaps they were speculating how far they might be able to go in influencing Pence and his boss Donald Trump to wield U.S. military power to advance Israeli interests. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, via the Trump family go-betweens, Jared Kushner and the family lawyers, has certainly had an impact in Washington. The Middle East landscape has changed considerably over the last year as a consequence, but the nature of the change is what is an issue. How many of these changes have actually benefited Israel's or the U.S.'s security interests? When Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman began his coup last June, ultimately resulting in this 31-year-old assuming absolute power, President Trump characteristically took full credit. "We have put our man on top," he bragged to his friends, according to Michael Wolff in his book Fire and Fury. Yes, Trump was right partly. Our man came out on top, but it was Netanyahu working the levers behind the scenes, and Mohammed bin Zayed's man in Washington, United Arab Emirates Ambassador Youssef al-Otaieb, who did the heavy lifting in order to change the U.S.'s settled preference for Prince bin Naif, a successor to the throne. And it was MBZ in the first place who had advised MBS that it was Israeli support that was both the necessary and the sufficient condition for him to become crown prince. Netanyahu and Israel cannot escape some responsibility for the condition in which the kingdom now finds itself. Are the more sober-minded Israelis now still congratulating themselves with enthusiasm for their new man at the top? One has some doubts as Saudi Arabia transforms into a ticking time bomb of internal, family, and tribal hatreds, and as the peripheral Emirates wonder what is to become of them in this new era of Saudi hyper-foreign policy activity, or what might be their futures were the Saudi bombs somehow to self-detonate, not pretty is likely to be their conclusion. I'm going to go to 2 Ezra chapter 15 and start at 28. Behold, a horrible vision, and the appearance thereof from the east, where the nations of the dragons of Arabia shall come out with many chariots, and the multitude of them shall be carried as the wind upon earth, that all they which hear them may fear and tremble. Also the Carmanians, which are the modern-day Iranians, raging in wrath, shall go forth as the wild boars of the wood, and with great power shall they come, and join battle with them, and shall waste a portion of the land of the Assyrians. And then shall the dragons have the upper hand, remembering their nature, and if they shall turn themselves, conspiring together in great power to persecute them, then these shall be troubled bled, and keep silence through their power, and shall flee. And from the land of the Assyrians shall the enemy besiege them, and consume some of them, and in their host shall be fear and dread, and strife among their kings. Behold, clouds from the east, and from the north and to the south, and they are very horrible to look upon, full of wrath and storm. They shall smite one upon another, and they shall smite down a great multitude of stars upon the earth, even their own star, and blood shall be from the sword unto the belly, and the dung of men unto the camel's hoe. And these dragons of Arabia are these Arabs, especially Saudi Arabia and its allies, which, as it stated in that article, with this new prince's extreme foreign policy, which has started the war in Yemen and is pushing for a war with Iran, they'll be gathered into that area to have a war, which will involve the Iranians, and it will spill over into the land of the Assyrians, which is Syria, which it already has. And as they're fighting with each other, Ishmael is a wild man, as stated in Scripture, and fights against everybody, and everybody fights against him. And eventually, they'll remember that wild man nature, remembering their nature, and then allies will start to smite each other and fight against each other through the will of the Most High. And for the second major aspect to Israel's influence on the Trump administration, one has to look no further than the Kurds. Israeli Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked said, just before Masoud Barzani's independence referendum, that Israel and countries of the West have a major interest in the establishment of the state of Kurdistan, she added. I think that the time has come for the U.S. to support the process. Netanyahu supported the Kurdish bid too, and reportedly urged Barzani to press on, despite the opposition amongst the Kurds themselves and from all the surrounding neighboring states. The ploy did not work out too well. First came the Barzani fiasco, with his initiative squashed within 24 hours, and now we have Plan B, a Kurdish statelet in northern Syria, and that too is now unraveling. Israel, having failed to get buffer zones it sought along the Golan Armistice line on the Syrian-Iraqi borderline, and having failed to keep the Iraqi border closed, prevailed upon a receptive U.S. administration to plant a Kurdish wedge in northeastern Syria. This was an outcome intended to keep Syria weak, the oil and gas assets being denied to the central government, and the Syrian state divided and at odds with itself, and to keep open the connectivity of the Syrian mini-state project to the Kurdish population of northern Iraq. The Israeli project with the Kurds is a long-standing one and very much hands-on. It was most clearly formalized in the so-called Oded Yinon Plan, which was published in 1982, and which advocated the fragmentation of the Middle East, in terms of a logic of sectarian division. So when Minister Shaked advocated for a Kurdish state, saying that it would be integral to efforts to reshape the Middle East, it is highly likely that she had the Yinon Plan in mind, which advocated an Iraq fragmented into separate states. And I've read through this plan, and I recommend you brothers do too, because you'll see that a lot of things that were stated way back in 1982 are starting to come to fruition through the plan. And as you can remember, when America went to war with Iraq, it broke up Iraq and caused strife between the Sunnis and the Shias. And I'm going to go to Jeremiah 49 and 20. Therefore hear the counsel of Yahweh that he hath taken against Edom, and his purposes that he hath purposed against the inhabitants of Teman. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. Surely he shall make their habitations desolate with them. And with that Oded Yinon plan, a lot of countries are going to be drawn into that area to fix the aftermath of it, and once they all get down there, they'll start fighting, which will lead to the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, and that's all because those Israelis, those Amalekite Edomites, which the least of the flock shall draw them out, draw them out to that area because they're trying to, as it said, break up all those other little nations so they can be the only strong nation there. But again, in spite of the Barzani fiasco, there was overreach. Moscow and Damascus offered the Kurds a compromise that would allow for a measure of autonomy, but insisted on the preservation of state sovereignty over all of Syria, where it says Moscow, which is the capital of Russia, tried to find a compromise that would allow for a limited measure of autonomy for the Kurds. That reminds me of Ezekiel 38:7. Be thou prepared, and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard unto them. And this is speaking of Gog, which is modern-day Russia, and they were trying to be a guard unto the Kurds and give them that limited autonomy. But as you'll see, the Kurds forcefully declined, apparently believing that Washington had their backs, and U.S. CENTCOM overreached. They gave the Kurds advanced anti-tank weapons and man-portable surface-to-air missiles, too. Of course, the Turks got it. Such weapons in the hands of the Kurds change the whole strategic balance. Such weapons have nothing to do with pushing Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to agree to a modified constitution for Syria. That narrative is quite implausible. This weaponizing was about empowering the Kurds a la Oded Yinan, not just in Syria and Iraq, but as a ploy to weaken and fracture Turkey as well. No wonder the Kurds of Afrin were so full of themselves. Senior Turkish commentators such as Ibrahim Karagol, a leading commentator who is close to Erdogan, were unsurprisingly plain in identifying Israel's hand in wanting Turkey's state Slovakia, and plain in identifying Israel's hand in wanting Turkey's state fragmentation. So what has been achieved? Ankara now is profoundly and perhaps irrevocably disenchanted with Washington. Damascus is quietly sorting out Idlib, now depleted by armed opposition groups commandeered by Turkey to assist in Afrin, and pressure on Assad is relieved, and Turkey has shifted more deeply into the Russian-Iran-Iraq axis. Washington is now ruining the Turkish anger, but what did they expect? I'm going to go to Obadiah 7, and in this whole small book speaks of what's going to happen to Esau, Edom, the so-called white man, in these final days. All the men of thy confederacy, such as Turkey, have brought thee even to the border. The men that are at peace with thee have deceived thee. They're right now in word only. They're really only Turkey says it's the U.S.'s ally, but as it said there, they're going more and more towards the Russian camp, and prevailed against thee, which once World War III starts, they will prevail against the U.S. when they're allied with Russia and they send those nukes over here. They that eat thy bread have laid a wound under thee. Those nukes destroying the landmass of America. There is none understanding in him. And to further prove the point where it says Turkey has shifted more deeply into the Russian-Iran-Iraq axis, I'm going to go back to Ezekiel 38 and go to 6. Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters and his bands, and many people with thee. And Gomer is the modern-day Turkey, and it's in this beginning part of Ezekiel 38, it talks about how it's going to be confederated with Gog in these final days, which is Russia. The writing was on the wall at the May 19th press conference held by Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, Joint Chief of Staff's Chairman General Joseph Dunford, and Special Envoy to counter ISIS Breck McGurk, in which they attempted to smooth over frayed relations with Ankara regarding disputes regarding Washington's support for the Kurds. But then came Netanyahu's third major input into U.S. policy, encouraging President Trump to ditch the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal,